Aria stood at the sink and looked at herself in the mirror. She carefully examined every millimeter of her face. Today was a bad day. She didn't like anything about herself. She pulled back to see herself in the knee-length reflection. She took off her robe and looked at herself. She felt too full for herself today. The girl pulled on a robe, sat down on the floor, and put her head in her hands. She tried to calm down and convince herself that she was just in a bad mood today. There was a knock on the door. Aria made a face of displeasure. She came out of the bathroom, letting her husband pass. Hudson, as always, was late for work, which Aria hated. When she agreed to marry him, she thought his business would go up, and she wouldn't have to work anymore. But a year later, the flower sale stopped, leaving Hudson not only without money, but also with a lot of debts. Aria had to look for a job. She got a job as an administrator at a beauty salon where she spent 3 days a week. The salary was tiny, but Aria wasn't going to look for anything better. She believed that this only stimulates the spouse. Only Hudson did not succumb to such stimulation. Hudson got a job in a small office where he doted on a new job. Only there was barely enough money. By the end of the month, there was almost nothing left of it. Aria again reproached her husband for his insolvency, but he tactfully remained silent. But Hudson's friend, David, was much more promising, interesting, and reliable. Aria poured coffee into a mug and went to the window to look at those who were in a hurry to work. Hudson came up from behind, kissed his wife on the neck, and left. Aria waited for about half an hour when an expensive snow-white car drove up to the house. He turned out to be a handsome, albeit middle-aged man with a large bouquet of flowers. Aria hurried to the door to immediately press the intercom button. David entered the apartment, wrapping one arm around Aria's waist. She immediately went limp in his arms. Exchanging kisses, they retired to the bedroom. Here, on the marital bed, Aria cheated on Hudson and David, not for the first time. Yes, of course, she was worried that her husband might unexpectedly return. But this feeling only fueled her temperament, and at each such meeting, she tried to get enough of the man, his strong, and at the same time, affectionate hands, his ability to give her unique pleasure. Hudson, as a man, also suited her, but David was older and apparently more experienced in these matters. With him, Aria could be on top of bliss countless times in one date. So this time, the man tried to do everything so that the mistress would receive her portion of pleasure. David left only 3 hours later, leaving the girl alone. Aria placed the bouquet in 2 vases, evenly distributing a large armful. In the evening, she told her husband that the flowers had been sent from work. Hudson was not surprised. After all, he thought his wife was very beautiful. No wonder she has fans. They watched the series together and then went to bed. The next morning, David called Aria and suggested that they go to another city together to relax and not hide from anyone. She immediately agreed and came up with her own story for her husband. In the evening, she told Hudson that she was going to a refresher course to apply for the position of manager. Hudson was very happy. After all, if his wife starts earning more, she will finally leave him alone with claims about low wages. In the evening of the same day, David came to them. Hudson was glad to see his friend. They hugged and shared their impressions of the hard work. Aria set the table for them and sat down between the men. Her husband's hand was on one knee and her lover's on the other. David urged his friend to return to business. Like now is the most blessed time. But he refused. Hudson talked with admiration about his new position and an interesting project. He kept silent only about a small salary. Aria rolled her eyes, threw the towel on the table, and went into another room. The men talked late into the night. Hudson came to bed late. In this state, it was impossible to get caresses from him. But the man was willing to talk about his friend and how lucky he was. After all, they have been friends with David for 20 years, although they have an age difference of more than 5 years. Aria wasn't listening to him. She didn't get what she wanted, so she was distracted by the phone. Right now, All she could think about was the upcoming trip. She tossed and turned all night, sometimes angry at her husband's snoring, sometimes at her own anxiety. She really wanted to go, but she had a bad feeling about it. Hudson left late for work. Aria decided to sleep longer. She took time off from work and wanted to rest before the upcoming trip. David arrived closer to lunch. Aria loaded her purple suitcase and got into the car. The trip took over 6 hours, although we expected to get there much faster. They just stopped, turning into secluded corners, wanting to satisfy their longing for each other. Although they had been tumbling in bed for almost 3 hours yesterday, it still wasn't enough for Aria. She was insatiable in this regard. Moreover, no one could stop them here. Hudson returned home late at night. He plopped down on the sofa, threw back his head, and smiled broadly. His new project was approved today. This means that he is moving to another company and to a completely different position. The salary will increase almost 4 times. Hudson thought only of how pleased his wife would be to learn that she would no longer have to work. He called her to tell her the good news, but she didn't pick up the phone. It was late, and it must have been a hard day. Hudson explained her silence by saying that his wife had most likely already gone to bed. Aria was indeed in bed, but she was not asleep. Hudson could not even imagine that his wife was now in bed with his best friend, and the lovers still had a whole hot night of love ahead of them. Aria woke up only closer to lunch. My whole body ached pleasantly from the night's love run. The girl stood up, stretched sweetly, and smiled. There was a plate of fresh cakes and a mug of tea with lemon on the table by the bed. She reached for dessert and enjoyed her breakfast. Aria dreamed of such a sweet life. An expensive hotel, breakfast in bed, and an insatiable man next to her. Aria got up, put on makeup, and got dressed. David left on a work issue, but promised to be back by 12. When he arrived, he sent a message to his mistress so that she would come down. Aria put on beautiful scarlet shoes with thin stilettos, which her lover bought her yesterday. She chose a red handbag with black embroidery. Her husband once gave it to her, saying that it was made to order. Aria closed the room and went down to the car. All day they walked around the city, went to shopping malls, and bought Aria everything she wanted. The girl was so tired that she literally begged her lover to stop at a cafe. David chose one of the coolest establishments, and 20 minutes later, they were already standing at the counter. The receptionist suggested that they wait 10 minutes until the newly vacated table was prepared. David agreed. The lovers were making out at the reception desk. Aria went to the toilet, leaving her things with David. She was gone for quite a long time, and the man got bored. While Aria was adjusting her makeup and applying lipstick, David decided to take a selfie with a place mark. Soon the girl returned, all aflame with delight. Everything in this place was done with a touch of luxury. They were led to a table where the couple placed an order and waited. Aria took a set of rolls and a large milkshake. David chose a good steak and coffee. They laughed, talked, and shared their emotions. Aria hasn't felt so good in a long time. Late in the evening, a happy Hudson came home. Today was the last day of his work at the same place. Tomorrow, a new life with good incomes will begin. Hudson dialed his wife, but she dropped it and texted back that she was busy. For the last 3 days, she has never called, answered only briefly in the messenger. My wife told me that the courses were very difficult, that she couldn't do anything. Hudson was only thinking about how pleased Aria would be to learn about his current salary. The man made himself tea, a couple of sandwiches, and went into the living room. He ate dinner, lay down on the couch, and took out his phone. The feed on the social network was full of faceless photographs. But then he got to David's photo. A friend was taking a selfie in a huge gold-rimmed mirror. Hudson liked it and scrolled on, but something made him return to the picture. Hudson saw that the handbag he had given his wife was sticking out under his friend's arm. He couldn't be wrong. He ordered the bag from an individual designer. The tailoring cost him a tidy sum. In that second, He understood everything. It felt as if a heavy dust bag had been dropped on his head. Hudson put down the phone and stared at the ceiling. All this time, his wife was not on the course, but was having fun with his best friend. He didn't sleep the next night. The man collected all his wife's belongings and put them on the doorstep. He was never going to forgive her. Thousands of thoughts swarmed in his head about Aria's unfaithfulness and David's meanness, about how sorry he is for himself. He thought they had a real strong family, and every family has its own difficulties. Aria sat in the car and looked sadly into the distance. The trip was over, and the happiest time of her life was over too. She chewed on a chocolate bar, washed down with takeaway coffee, and watched the endless clearing give way to the urban landscape. An hour later, she was already standing at the entrance with the suitcase. The girl went up to the floor. She wanted to open the door, but the key wouldn't fit. Aria was confused and called her husband. He asked to wait for him for about an hour. They say the door jammed and had to change the locks. An hour later, Hudson went up to the floor, hugged his wife, and began vying to tell her everything that had happened. Aria literally jumped for joy when she learned she would no longer have to work. Hudson said he would be the first to come in to prepare a surprise. The girl trembled in anticipation of a pleasant gift. But instead, her husband put all the bags with her belongings and a printed photo with the same bag in the entrance. Aria was stunned. She immediately told David about everything on the phone, but he did not want to pick her up. He said that he just wanted to relax and did not expect any relationship. Aria was so shocked that she stood in the entrance for another 20 minutes, wondering what to do. Finally, gathering her strength, she called a taxi and went to her mother with her things. Their relationship was strained, but Aria no longer has another roof over her head. That's how a walking wife and a bosom friend radically changed Hudson's life. Well, how it will develop further is another story.